Okay, we're gonna talk about collisions. Okay, collisions in 1D, in one dimension. In this case, the second particle at rest, and this is going to be second particle at rest, and this is going to be collision where the kinetic energy before the collision is equal to the kinetic energy after the collision. So this is going to be an elastic collision. This is going to be elastic collision. So what do we have here? Well, we have two particles that are moving. We have particle one, let's call it particle one, and then we have particle two. And the thing here is that particle one is going this way with a positive velocity to the right. And let's call it velocity one. And particle two is at rest, so let's call it velocity two equal to 0. And they're gonna collide. There's just gonna be a collision here. So after the collision, what's gonna happen? That's the problem. So we have what's gonna happen is that if these two particles, okay, let's say mass one is equal to mass two, they have the same mass, and after the collision, particle one is going to take the place of particle two after the collision. And particle two is going to come this way to the right with a positive velocity. And here's particle two. So particle one is going to stay in the place where particle two was. And now velocity 2 prime is going to be equal to velocity 1, because particle 2 is going to acquire velocity 1. And how do we do this? Okay, so let's do the math here, the physics. So we can find velocity 1 prime, velocity 1 prime and velocity 2 prime, which is, these are the velocities after the collision. After the collision, we have velocity 1 prime, we're looking for that, and velocity 2 prime, which is the velocity of the second particle after the collision. We need to find that. So we could use these equations that say that V1 prime is M1 minus M2 over, this is M1, M1 over M1 plus M2 plus M2. Let's do the here M1 plus M2, and this multiplied by 1 V1. V1 is the velocity of the first particle before the collision, and V2 prime is going to be 2 M1 over M1 plus M2. Now, these equations can be used only, and this is V1 here. V1 is the velocity of the first particle before the collision. We already said that. So these equations can only be used when the two particles are colliding in one dimension, and when the collision is elastic. If the collision is elastic, and if the collision is in one dimension, elastic and collision in one dimension, then you can use these equations right here. So we can calculate velocity 1 prime. Over here, we'll do it right here. Velocity 1 prime is going to be equal to, well, it's going to be mass 1 and mass 2 because they're equal. So this is going to be 0. M1 minus M2 is going to be 0. times velocity 1. So velocity 1 prime is going to be 0. And velocity 2 prime is going to be 2 times the mass, but the masses are equal. So it's going to be 2 mass over 2m again here, because mass 1 plus mass 2 is 2m. And because see, mass 1 is equal to mass 2, and that's equal just to the mass. You don't need the subindexes. Yeah, let me change here the notation so we don't confuse people. So this is going to be mass like that. Mass 1 is equal to mass 2 is equal to the mass. And here we have this. Let's use the other notation here. We have this is a mass and this is mass right there. So this has to be multiplied by V1. So V2 prime is going to be 1 times V1. So it's equal to V1. So what's happening? V2 prime is going to have a velocity equal to V1. V2, or right here, this is what's happening. V2 prime is going to be now equal to V1. And V1 prime is going to be 0. So V1 prime is going to be 0. And the first particle, it's going to collide with the second particle. And then the first particle is going to stay at rest because V1 prime is equal to 0, according to these equations. And particle number 2 is going to have a velocity, and now it's going to move with a velocity V2 prime, which is the velocity V1. So all the kinetic energy is going to be transferred from particle 1 to particle 2, and particle 1 has no more kinetic energy and it's going to stay at rest. Collision in one dimension, elastic, where the second particle is at rest before the collision, and you have another problem here. Thank you. Bye.